So what I showed you just now was providing input parameter to a particular action by user. That is, you yourself can insert the values using options like action properties, wherein you're giving the input value for user ID on your own. But what if suppose I want to take the input from some other test? Say for example, what I'll do is this test is calling some other action. Okay, so insert call to new. This is my action 2, so this is my new action. Now this action will have, I can access action properties by right clicking on the action, go to action properties and to the parameters tab. Now as you can see, we can define a particular name to this. For example, I'll give user ID, and default values, I'll just give the name of the action itself, action 2. This is the default value of user ID. So like in action 1, I'll just copy this code. So as I said, action parameters are local to the particular action. So when I run this action, first the action 1 runs, ngim is displayed since the user ID is, this parameter is local to action 1. And when I run and action 1 is calling action 2, and now when it is displaying it, although the code is same, the value in user ID is different for different actions. That is action 2 for action 2. Okay, now to make things easier, I'll just rename the value gym to action 1, so that you will know that where the value is coming from. Okay, so when I run this, you will see the value is coming from action 1. Action 1 is calling action 2, same code is run again, and now the value is action 2. That is action user ID is taking the value from action 2. Now these are individual actions, they are taking individual values from user. Now as I said, suppose action 1 wants to communicate with action 2, that is, it wants to supply the input to action 2. So how is it possible? So I'll go to action 1, I'll right click and action, there's an insert call to existing. Now action 2 is already existing, I'm calling action 2 from action 1. I click on OK. When I go back to action 1, you'll see a code is generated. Now this is automatically, you don't automatically generated, you don't have to write on your own. When you call the existing action 2 from action 1, this is the code that is generated. So after executing these two steps, what QTP will do is it will encounter this step and it will call action 2. Now what I want is, I want to use the parameter from action 1 to action 2. So what I'll do is, now watch this, at the end of the code I'll just add a comma and then in double brackets for a string I can give any value, for say for example action 1, since this value is coming from action 1. Okay, now what this code does, action 1 is the string value which I had given. So what QTP does is, it will replace the default value, input parameter value, which is defined for action 2. That is, in action 2, when I right click on action properties and go to parameters, user ID as a default value action 2. This will be replaced by action 1. Since action 1, this is what we added at the end of the call to action 2. So this is how we pass the parameters from one action to another. So let's see, when I run this script, first the action 1 will run and it will display the user ID value for action 1, which is action 1 that we already know. Now let's see what will happen when action 2 runs. Now as you can see, when we are in action 2, and now the user ID value, which was action 2 earlier, is replaced by action 1. And now again we can see the value is action 2. So this is how you create the test parameters and action parameters, and supply the input parameters through users or from one action to another action. So this is very useful when you need to pass different values in your variables using parametrization. So we have covered test action parameters, the first one, and the third object, that is environment variable parameters. Now we'll see random number parameters, since data table parameters is a big chapter and it's a separate chapter in itself. So first we'll see what are random number parameters. Random number parameters enable you to insert random numbers as values in your test. So suppose I want to get a random number between 1 and 100. We can use a particular code. I'll show you. So I'll just comment the existing code. Now suppose I use any numbers. For example, I give the variable name as integer, since it is integer, int number. So this is my variable, and I want a random number to be generated in my variable between value 1 to 100. So this is the code for generating a random number between 1 to 100, and print the variable number. So when I run this, okay, the print is generated in file. So as you can see, 98 is the random number which is generated. Now suppose we run it again. Now this you can ignore action 2, because this is already, I'm using the existing script which we used for calling one action, action 2 using action 1. But see, what I want to explain is, in QTP's print log, I can see random numbers that is generated. Earlier it was 98, now it is 40. So in this way, suppose you want to generate random numbers between certain range, you can use the following code, and this is how you give the random parameters to your script. Random number parameters you can supply as input to the script, and you can use to test different scenarios using certain random numbers. So the last thing that is remaining is data table parameters. So data table parameters is covered in working with data table. As I said, I've kept a separate chapter for this because it is pretty big on its own and it has a lot of concepts in it. since data table is a very important part of QTP.